She stood alone in the park, her white wedding dress clinging to the rain, mascara running down her cheeks like the last traces of a dream that had already drowned. Strangers walked by, pretending not to notice, but one man couldn't look away. A single dad carrying 2 cups of coffee paused mid-step, unsure if she was real or just a reflection of his own loneliness. He didn't know that stopping for her that day would change everything. That one quiet act of kindness in the rain would turn a broken wedding into the beginning of something neither of them believed they still deserved. Rain drifted through the street lamps like falling glass as Ethan Miles pushed his daughter's empty stroller across the park path, its wheels clicking over wet bricks. The evening shift had ended an hour late, and the world around him hummed with distant traffic and the soft hiss of drizzle turning heavier by the minute. He could have cut through the busier main road, but habit pulled him toward the quiet park, where the air, at least, felt honest. Then he saw her. A woman in a wedding dress stood beneath the fountain's iron arch, lace heavy with rain, bouquet scattered across the puddled concrete. Her veil clung to her shoulder like seaweed, mascara traced rivers down her cheeks. She wasn't crying, not exactly, just staring at the ground with the stillness of someone who'd run out of choices. For a long beat, Ethan froze halfway down the path. Maybe she'd been in a photo shoot, maybe she was waiting for someone, maybe none of this was his business. Lightning flashed behind the church steeple beyond the trees. Instinct whispered, "Keep walking." His shirt was already soaked, and Leela was asleep at Mrs. Marin's. He'd promised he'd be back before 10. The smart thing would be to pass quietly, pretend he hadn't seen the impossible picture in front of him, a bride alone in the rain. But then she shivered, wrapping her arms around herself, and something inside him, the part that still heard his late wife's voice when someone looked lost, made him stop. "You okay?" he called softly, keeping a respectful distance. She didn't look up, only a faint nod, like a broken signal. Ethan stepped closer, unzipping his work jacket and holding it out. "You'll freeze out here." Her fingers trembled as she accepted it, murmuring a barely audible thank you. Up close, he saw the absence of a ring, the faint bruise of pressure where one should have been. She looked mid-30s, composed even in collapse, like a painting that had been rained on but not ruined. Somewhere behind them, the city kept moving. Car horns, laughter, the normal sounds of people who had somewhere to go. Ethan realized he didn't, not until he was sure she'd be all right. And in that pause between responsibility and compassion, the story of both their lives began to change. By morning, the storm had blown itself out, leaving the streets rinsed clean but heavy with the smell of wet asphalt and coffee steam rising from the corner vendors. Ethan Miles tightened the straps on his faded work boots and leaned against the counter of his one-room kitchen, watching the clock tick closer to 7. A half-packed lunchbox sat beside a stack of overdue bills. Across the tiny table, a crayon drawing taped to the fridge read, "Me and Daddy, Super Fixers," in crooked letters. He smiled faintly at it, even as exhaustion pressed on his shoulders like sandbags. 2 double shifts this week, 1 more tonight. If the warehouse cut hours again, he'd lose the apartment. And if he lost the apartment, he'd lose Lila. Custody court didn't care that he read bedtime stories and tied perfect ponytails. They cared about rent receipts and stable environments. The social worker's words still echoed in his head. "You're doing your best, Mr. Miles, but children need structure." Structure, funny word, he thought, for someone holding it all together with duct tape. He poured coffee into a chipped mug, the same one from his late wife's hospital stay. The design, faded sunflowers, had cracked near the rim. He never replaced it, couldn't bring himself to. Every morning he drank from the same fracture and reminded himself that surviving wasn't always pretty. A soft knock came from the bedroom door. "Daddy?" Lila's voice, small but bright. "In here, bug," he called. She padded out in mismatched socks, hair half-brushed, clutching a cereal box. "You forgot milk again," she teased with a gap-toothed grin. "I'm conserving resources," he said, reaching for her and stealing a quick hug. She giggled into his neck, the simple warmth slicing through the fatigue. After breakfast, he packed her backpack, tucking the permission slip for next week's field trip between notebooks. The envelope beside it, Brightwood Academy Scholarship Program, remained unopened. He already knew what it said. Pending financial verification. That polite phrase that really meant find a sponsor or lose the spot. He'd spent months applying for that scholarship, chasing recommendation letters and filling out forms during lunch breaks. Lila had scored high enough on the entrance test to make the shortlist, but funding was limited. And a single parent with debt didn't inspire donors. Still, he couldn't let her see the fear. "You'll do great today," he told her as he walked her to Mrs. Marin's, the elderly neighbor who watched her after school. "Do great at what?" she asked innocently. "At everything," he said, and she accepted that like it was law. On the drive to work, the radio droned about rising fuel prices and city budget cuts. Ethan barely heard it. His mind kept circling back to last night, the woman in the wedding dress. He'd driven her to an apartment building on the east side, one of those glass towers with doorman and security cameras. She hadn't invited him in, just thanked him again, eyes unreadable. When she slipped out of his jacket and handed it back folded, he'd noticed the faint shimmer of tears she'd been fighting the whole ride. He'd almost asked if she wanted to call someone, but something in her posture, dignified, closed, made him stop. She wasn't looking for rescue. She just needed someone not to look away. Now, as delivery trucks rolled through the depot gates, Ethan threw himself into motion. Scanning, lifting, moving, always moving. Work was rhythm, and rhythm was safety. But each time his phone buzzed, he half expected it to be another notice, from the landlord, from the academy, from the attorney reminding him his custody review was in 3 weeks. 3 weeks, he muttered under his breath. The same countdown that had haunted him since Christmas. One missed payment, one late shift, and he could lose everything that still mattered. At lunch, he sat in the break room scrolling old messages. One new email blinked at the top. Subject, Brightwood Academy Scholarship Panel, Final Deliberation, March 8th. His thumb hovered over the screen, pulse kicking. That was next Tuesday. He exhaled slowly, closing the phone without opening it. Sometimes, he thought, it's easier to believe in miracles when you don't read the fine print. Outside, the clouds began gathering again. Not quite a storm yet, but enough to turn the sky the same bruised gray as yesterday when he'd met the woman in white. And though he didn't know her name, her image stayed with him. The way she'd stood beneath the fountain, soaked and silent, as if she too understood what it meant to start over in the rain. The rain had turned heavier that night, swallowing streetlights in veils of silver. Ethan Miles parked beside the curb, hazards blinking weakly against the storm, and stepped out into ankle-deep puddles. The woman in the wedding dress stood near the fountain, bouquet petals drifting around her feet like confetti that had forgotten what celebration was for. She didn't flinch when he approached, only tightened her grip on the fabric gathered at her knees. "Ma'am," he said softly, staying a few feet back. "Are you hurt?" Her head shook once. Drops of water flicked from her hair, plastered against pale cheeks. She looked mid-30s, refined even in ruin. Makeup smudged, posture straight. The kind of composure that came from a lifetime of holding it together in public. "My car's gone," she said finally, voice low, controlled. "They took it when they left. I didn't want to go with them." Ethan hesitated, sensing details he shouldn't ask about. "There's a bench under the awning," he offered, nodding toward the park's small pavilion. "You can wait there until the rain slows." She hesitated, then followed, each step slow and deliberate, the wet train of her dress dragging like a burden she couldn't drop. Under the awning, he shrugged off his jacket and placed it around her shoulders again. "I'm Ethan," he said after a pause. "You don't have to tell me anything. I just didn't feel right walking past." Her eyes lifted to his, faint green beneath the lamplight. "Claire," she said simply. "Claire Hartman." They stood in silence, the world narrowing to the rhythm of rain on metal roofing. A bus rumbled by in the distance. Thunder rolled somewhere beyond the city. "Do you have someone you can call?" he asked. She looked down at her bare hand. "Not tonight." Ethan glanced toward the dark parking lane. "I can drive you home. I promise I'm not dangerous. My daughter's 7, and she'd scold me if I didn't help." That coaxed the smallest flicker of a smile. "That sounds safer than standing here pretending I have a plan." The ride was quiet. The wipers scraped, the heater hummed, and between them stretched a peace that felt fragile and unfamiliar. When he pulled up in front of a tall apartment building, Claire folded the jacket carefully on her lap. "You didn't have to stop," she murmured. "Sometimes stopping's the only thing you can do," he replied. She looked at him one last time, eyes soft with something between gratitude and disbelief. "Thank you, Ethan." He watched her disappear through the revolving doors, her white dress a ghost against the marble lobby. He didn't know it yet, but that single ride home had already rewritten both their stories. By sunrise, the city looked washed new, but neither Ethan Miles nor Claire Hartman felt any cleaner. Ethan clocked into the warehouse early, shoulders still stiff from the long night. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as forklifts beeped through narrow aisles. He fell into rhythm: scan, lift, load, anything to drown the loop in his head. The soaked woman, her calm voice saying, "I didn't want to go with them." Every hour bled into the next. When his phone vibrated with a text from Mrs. Marin, "Lila ate 2 breakfasts again, she's fine," he smiled, tension easing just enough to keep going. At lunch, he sat in his dented sedan, half-unwrapped sandwich forgotten, eyes on the gray skyline. Somewhere in one of those towers, she was probably trying to rebuild her life too. Across town, Claire sat alone in a minimalist apartment she hadn't chosen. The silence throbbed. The dress hung over the back of a chair like a ghost of her old life. The ring lay in a glass dish beside a cooling cup of tea. Yesterday should have been the start of a merger, 2 law families joining through marriage and business. Instead, she had walked away mid-ceremony after learning the final contract used charitable funds to mask embezzlement. Her fiancé's smirk when she confronted him had told her everything. He'd do it again, and expect her to sign. The press would call it a misunderstanding. Her firm would call it career suicide, but she called it survival. She opened her laptop, scanning resignation emails she couldn't yet send. Outside, sunlight struck the city's mirrored buildings, and she caught her reflection, bare-faced, eyes swollen, but steady. For the first time in years, she wasn't performing. By afternoon, Ethan returned home to find Lila sprawled on the rug drawing 2 stick figures under an umbrella. "That's us," she said proudly. "You always stop for people." He crouched beside her, heart twisting. "Not always, Bug." "Yeah, you do. You even helped that old man with his tire last week." He smiled, ruffling her hair. "Maybe I just have bad timing." When she went to wash up, he studied the drawing again. 2 figures, one small, one tall. Between them, a faint outline of a third he hadn't noticed before. A woman in a long dress, arms outstretched toward the rain. At that exact hour, Claire closed her laptop, exhaling slowly. She needed to face the board tomorrow. The Academy Foundation, her late mother's legacy project, had asked her to serve as interim director after the previous chair's sudden resignation. "Just until we reorganize," they'd said. 1 week to review pending scholarship files, 1 week to prove she still believed in justice that didn't hide behind paperwork. She straightened the jacket she'd swapped for her ruined gown and whispered to the empty room, "No more pretending." Somewhere, a father was doing the same, both of them unaware that their new beginnings were already on a collision course. Tuesday came cloaked in gray again, the kind of morning that made the whole city feel cautious. Ethan Miles had ironed his one good shirt twice, though it still bore the faint shadow of an old coffee stain near the cuff. Leela twirled in her school shoes, humming nervously while he double-checked her hair ribbon. "Do I look smart enough for smart people?" she asked. "The smartest," he said, tucking her drawing of a sun into her backpack. It was her good luck charm. The Brightwood Academy scholarship interviews were held in the West Wing conference room, a place of polished floors, glass walls, and quiet confidence. Ethan's throat tightened as they stepped inside. He'd filled out hundreds of forms, written essays about perseverance, but nothing prepared him for sitting in front of a panel that could decide his daughter's future in 15 minutes. The coordinator smiled politely, gesturing to a row of chairs. "Mr. Miles, please have a seat. The panel will begin shortly." He nodded, palms sweating, heartbeat drumming a rhythm too fast to hide. A side door opened. 3 evaluators entered, 2 men in tailored suits and a woman in a charcoal blazer carrying a folder marked Admissions Board, Hartman, acting chair. Ethan froze. The world seemed to tilt just slightly. Claire Hartman. Her hair was neatly tied back now, her expression composed, professional. The woman from the rain, here of all places, reading from a file that likely contained his name. For a heartbeat she didn't notice him. Then their eyes met across the sterile room. Recognition flickered like lightning behind her calm exterior. He saw it, the fraction of a second her breath caught, but then she blinked, face smoothing into neutrality. "Good morning, Mr. Miles. This is Leela?" Ethan's mouth went dry. "Yes, ma'am." Leela curtsied, making the older man on the panel chuckle. "Thank you for coming in," Claire continued evenly, flipping a page. "We'll keep this brief." Her voice was steady, every syllable measured. But Ethan heard what the others couldn't, a tremor beneath control, the echo of rain. His mind raced. Should he say something? Remind her who he was? What if acknowledging her made it worse? The paperwork clearly said conflict of interest disqualifies candidate. If she recused herself, who would take her place? Would anyone else even listen? So he stayed silent. Leela spoke about her science project and her favorite books, swinging her legs, oblivious to the electric current running between adults. Claire asked thoughtful questions, smiling gently at the child's answers, but never once looking at Ethan longer than necessary. When the interview ended, Claire thanked them with professional grace. "Results will be emailed within 2 weeks," she said, extending her hand. Ethan shook it carefully. Her grip was firm, warm, restrained. In her eyes, just for an instant, he caught something human. Regret, maybe. Gratitude. Then it was gone. Outside, he exhaled hard, the kind of breath that leaves a body emptier than before. If the universe was testing him, it had a cruel sense of humor. He never imagined that the woman he'd sheltered from a storm would now hold the decision that could define his daughter's future. And Claire, watching him leave through the glass door, felt her composure crack for the first time since that night. The conference room emptied, leaving only the 3 members of the scholarship panel and the muffled hum of an air vent. Claire Hartman adjusted the folder before her, aligning its corners to buy herself a heartbeat of calm. She could still feel the ghost of Ethan's handshake, the warmth, the restraint, the unspoken question behind his eyes. Across the table, Dr. Reeves, a senior trustee with too many rings and not enough patience, exhaled loudly. The Miles girl, bright, charming, but do we really want another financial aid case? The donor list is thin this quarter. Claire kept her voice even. Scholarships exist for financial aid cases, doctor. Her test scores rank in the top 3%. Reeves waved a dismissive hand. Numbers don't pay tuition. We have Mr. Bancroft's recommendation for a more sustainable candidate. He tapped a folder labeled Bancroft, Legacy Applicant. Claire had already read that file. Average grades, a glowing reference from his father, the same man underwriting the Academy's expansion wing. Her stomach turned. Are you suggesting we override scoring metrics for convenience? He smiled without apology. For practicality. Brightwood can't run on sentiment. The third board member, Miss Alvarez, hesitated. Maybe we review both cases fairly, she offered, but her tone lacked conviction. Claire leaned forward. The review process is supposed to be blind. I'd like the file scrubbed of names before final scoring. That's how the charter was written. Reeves snorted. That's outdated procedure. Nobody bothers anymore. Then maybe it's time we start again, she said quietly, almost to herself, though the edge in her tone was unmistakable. He folded his arms. If you want to waste staff time, be my guest. But the board meets Friday, and I doubt they'll approve your little crusade. Crusade. The word stung because it was true. She wasn't fighting only for one child.
She was fighting the creeping erosion of fairness she'd seen too often in rooms like this. The easy compromises, the quiet nods, the way decency was treated as naivety. She straightened. Then we'll meet Friday with verified scores. I'll have admissions run the audit tonight. Reeves leaned back, smirking. You'll regret it, Hartman. The Bancrofts donate 6 figures a year. You cross them, you'll be lucky to keep that chair. Claire gathered her notes, heart pounding but voice steady. I'd rather lose a chair than my conscience. When she left the room, the corridor's glass walls mirrored her reflection, composed, professional, trembling only in the fingertips. Inside, she was spiraling. She hadn't wanted to recognize Ethan today, hadn't wanted this collision of fate and duty. Yet here it was, daring her to prove that character mattered as much in boardrooms as it did on rain-soaked nights.
Back at her office, she sent an email to the admissions analyst. Rescore all finalists. Remove identifying data. Verify all recommendation letters for authenticity. She hit send before fear could stop her. Moments later, her phone buzzed, a message from the head administrator. Auditing donor-linked files may cause backlash. Proceed? Her reply was instant. Proceed. Outside, thunder rumbled distantly, as if the storm they'd both survived was rolling back for an encore. That night, Claire Hartman sat alone in her office long after the last hallway light had dimmed. The city glittered beyond the window, distant, unreachable. Her reflection in the glass looked composed, but her pulse betrayed her calm. The audit she'd ordered was still running, line by line of code parsing every application file. Each tick of progress felt like another step away from safety. Her email inbox blinked with new messages, subtle warnings dressed as courtesy. Reconsider before morning. Remember who funds this institution. Donors talk, Claire. She closed them all. Silence filled the room again, punctuated only by the rain tapping against the pane. She'd spent years believing justice was paperwork and procedure, that following the rules was the same as doing right. Tonight, that certainty cracked, because the system, when convenient, had always found ways to look the other way. She'd done it too, signed off on compromises because everyone else did, because it kept the peace. But Ethan Miles hadn't kept driving that night. He'd stopped. He'd offered kindness when there was nothing in it for him. If a man with nothing to spare could still give freely, then what excuse did she have with all her power and privilege? She rubbed her temples. "You're risking everything," she whispered. Her voice sounded small against the dark. Resignation letters drafted weeks ago sat in her outbox, unsent. The easy option would be to let the Bancroft files slide through, keep the donors happy, finish her interim term quietly. No scandal, no retaliation, no sleepless nights. But she couldn't. Not after seeing the exhaustion in Ethan's eyes, the way he'd hidden fear behind politeness in that interview. Not after hearing Lila's bright, unguarded answers. The world already punished goodness enough. It didn't need her help doing it. Her phone buzzed. Alvarez texting. Audit flags discrepancies in 2 legacy files. Reeves furious. Wants meeting at 9 a.m. Claire typed back. Let him be furious. She stood, pacing, the echo of her heels sharp against tile. Her mother's photograph hung by the bookshelf. Judge Eleanor Hartman, the woman who taught her that truth sometimes demands discomfort. Claire stared at it until the lump in her throat burned. "You always said justice isn't safe," she murmured. "Guess I finally understand what you meant." The office lights flickered once as thunder rolled closer. Somewhere in the database, the final line of the audit blinked, complete. She pulled up the report, her eyes widening as she read. Forged recommendations, duplicate donor IDs, inflated GPA entries for favored students. All of it systemic. Her decision crystallized, solid and terrifying. Tomorrow, she'll present the findings to the full board. She'll recommend disciplinary review. She'll also make sure the Miles application stayed under blind evaluation, as it should have been from the start. Her hand trembled slightly as she closed her laptop, but her voice was steady when she spoke into the quiet room.
Sometimes the right thing breaks the wrong people. And as the storm outside returned with steady, cleansing rain, she finally allowed herself to hope that this time, doing right might actually make something whole. The boardroom smelled of burnt coffee and tension. Claire Hartman stood at the head of the table, a stack of printed audit reports clutched tightly in her hands. Around her, the trustees murmured in disbelief as numbers and names spread across the screens. The evidence was irrefutable. Forged recommendation letters, inflated test scores, digital footprints leading straight to Reeves' assistant, and a cluster of donor-linked accounts. Reeves turned red. "You're overstepping, Hartman. We handle these matters internally." "We are handling them," Claire said quietly, "by following the charter everyone here swore to uphold." A silence settled, sharp as glass. Even Miss Alvarez looked stunned, reading the highlighted lines on the screen. This changes everything," she whispered. Claire nodded. "Effective immediately, all applications influenced by donor interference are void. Those scores will be reevaluated blind as policy dictates." Reeves slammed a fist against the table. "You've just cost this school $500,000 in annual support." "Then maybe we should ask why money mattered more than merit," she replied, calm but unyielding. The head administrator cleared his throat. "And the Miles application?" Claire's heart jumped, though she kept her expression steady. "Included in the blind pool," she said. "Its scores meet scholarship criteria. That's all that matters." There was more arguing, voices rising, then fracturing into uneasy compliance. When the meeting adjourned, Claire felt both lighter and hollow. She'd won a battle that might still cost her position. 2 weeks later, Ethan Miles received a thin white envelope stamped Brightwood Academy admissions office. His hands trembled as he tore it open at the kitchen counter, heart pounding. Inside, a single line read, "We are pleased to inform you that Lila Miles has been awarded full scholarship for the academic year." For a moment he couldn't breathe. Then laughter and tears collided in his throat. He pulled Lila close, spinning her around the small kitchen while she squealed, "We did it, Daddy! We did it!" He didn't know about the audit or the fight that had raged in a boardroom on his behalf. He only knew that somehow, in a world stacked against him, fairness had found its way through. And somewhere across the city, Claire closed her office blinds, watching rain streak the glass again, whispering a silent, "You're welcome," into the quiet. The weeks that followed unfolded in soft shades of disbelief. Ethan Miles adjusted to a new rhythm, morning lunches packed with care, uniforms neatly pressed, Lila humming Brightwood's anthem under her breath. Every time he dropped her off, he paused by the iron gates, watching her vanish into a crowd of children whose shoes shined brighter than his entire paycheck. He was grateful, but the mystery of it gnawed at him. Scholarships didn't just appear out of nowhere. Someone had made a decision. Someone who'd looked at a stack of papers and decided that merit mattered more than means. He wanted to thank them, even if he'd never know who it was. Then one Saturday, Brightwood hosted its spring fair. The campus was alive with laughter, balloons straining against strings, music drifting from the courtyard. Ethan volunteered at the food stall, handing out lemonade to a parade of parents. His eyes were scanning for Lila, but they caught on something else instead. A familiar figure near the art display, sunlight catching on a strand of auburn hair.
She wore jeans, a linen shirt rolled at the sleeves, a tote bag slung casually over one shoulder. Gone was the armor of professionalism. In its place stood a woman almost unrecognizable from the one behind the boardroom table, softer, unguarded, yet carrying the same quiet authority. Ethan froze, unsure if he should approach. As if sensing the hesitation, Claire turned. Their eyes met, and the faintest smile curved her lips. "Mr. Miles," she greeted, voice calm but warmer now. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Volunteer duty," he managed, wiping his palms on his jeans. "Couldn't let the kids do all the work." She laughed softly, a sound that disarmed him more than any verdict could. "Leela's exhibit is wonderful," she said, nodding toward a watercolor taped to the display board. It showed 3 figures under an umbrella, the same drawing from months ago, refined now in brighter colors. "She loves rain," he said, "thinks it makes people honest." Claire's gaze softened. Smart girl. They walked together past rows of handmade crafts and baked goods. Conversation came easily this time, about the fair, about Leela's adjustment, about how life always seemed to circle back to unexpected places. "I wanted to thank whoever made the scholarship decision," Ethan said finally, stopping near the fountain. "It changed everything for us." Claire hesitated, fingers brushing the strap of her bag. "You don't have to thank anyone. You earned it." He studied her expression, serene but edged with something deeper. Realization dawned slowly, tenderly. "It was you," he said quietly. Her eyes met his, unflinching now. "The process was fair," she said, though her tone trembled. "That's all that matters." "Maybe," he replied, "but fairness needs people who care enough to keep it fair." The words lingered between them like a secret only the rain could wash clean. Neither spoke for a while. Then Claire smiled, the kind of smile that felt like sunrise after months of gray. "Leela's lucky," she said softly. "So am I," Ethan answered. They stood together as children's laughter echoed around them, the same fountain rippling nearby, the place where everything had begun and where something new was quietly taking root. Spring blurred into summer, and soon Claire Hartman became a familiar name in the Miles household. It started innocently enough, a thank you email about the fair, a shared photo of Leela's prize ribbon, then a phone call about a misplaced permission slip that somehow turned into an hour-long conversation about childhood books. Before either of them noticed, contact became routine. Calls, texts, small check-ins that carried the comfort of habit. Claire found herself stopping by the hardware store on Saturdays for light bulbs that somehow never matched the fixtures she already owned. Ethan pretended not to notice. He'd tease, "You sure you don't need duct tape too? I hear it fixes everything." She'd laugh, really laugh, and reply, "You'd be surprised what I've fixed with paperwork and coffee." Their worlds, so different in scale and privilege, began to overlap at the edges. One evening, she offered to help Lila with her science project, a small wind turbine built from recycled cans. They worked in Ethan's kitchen, a cramped space fragrant with tomato soup and cinnamon. Claire rolled up her sleeves, surprising herself with how easily she fit there. "Miss Claire," Lila said seriously, "you need more glitter on your poster. That's what makes it scientific." "Ah," Claire replied solemnly, sprinkling a handful across the cardboard. "Peer review approved, then." "Totally," Lila confirmed, and Ethan nearly choked on his coffee laughing. For the first time in years, laughter filled that apartment, like furniture they didn't know they'd been missing. By July, the 3 of them were spending weekends together. Zoo trips, library readings, long walks through the same park where rain had once turned strangers into allies. The fountain had been clean since then, the marble bright again. One Sunday, Lila tossed a coin into it. "What'd you wish for?" Ethan asked. "That you two stop looking at each other like you're scared to smile," she said, grinning mischievously. Claire blushed. Ethan coughed into his sleeve. "Your daughter is terrifyingly observant," she murmured later. "She gets that from her mom," he said softly. Silence settled between them, tender rather than awkward. Claire had read the case notes, knew the details of his custody struggle, but hearing the grief in his voice gave them new meaning. "You still wear the ring?" she asked gently. He nodded. Not as a chain, just as a promise to keep doing better. She smiled faintly. "Then maybe you already have." At Brightwood's Autumn Festival, Lila performed a small recital, a reading she'd written, titled People Who Stop. It was simple, heartfelt, about strangers who pause when others keep walking. Claire listened from the front row, tears catching light, as Lila's voice cracked at the end. Stopping means you still believe people can be good. When the applause faded, Ethan found Claire near the stage steps, eyes glossy. "You okay?" She nodded, laughing softly. "You warned me she was persuasive." "She doesn't give people much choice." "Wonder where she gets that," Claire teased, nudging his arm. After the festival, they stopped at a cafe nearby.
Same one she'd visited the morning after her almost wedding, now a place of quiet redemption. They sat outside, steam curling from paper cups, city lights reflecting in the puddles. "Funny," she said, tracing her finger around the rim of her cup. "A year ago, I thought my life was planned forever. I was going to marry a man who looked perfect on paper. Turns out, paper lies." Ethan looked at her carefully. "Yeah, so does exhaustion. Makes you think hope's something you can't afford." Claire's eyes lifted to his. "Do you ever think the storm that night was supposed to happen?" He chuckled softly. "Supposed to? Probably not. But I'm glad it did." They fell into silence again, not heavy this time, just full. Around them, the world hummed with quiet motion. A couple laughing inside, traffic far away, the whisper of wind through the trees. Lila burst out of the cafe moments later, clutching a chocolate croissant. "You guys were staring again," she announced. "That's the first step to being in love. Mrs. Marin says so." "Mrs. Marin needs fewer romantic movies," Ethan muttered, face red. Claire laughed. Well, she's not wrong. From that day, Miss Claire slowly became just Claire. Dinners became invitations. Invitations became traditions. And somewhere between the wind turbine project and Lila's bedtime stories, the line between gratitude and love blurred into something steadier, something real. One rainy evening, an echo of the night they first met, Ethan walked her to her car. The air shimmered with reflected street light. "You still hate storms?" he asked.
"Not anymore," she said. "I met someone good in one." He smiled, brushing a wet strand from her face. "Then maybe I'll stop waiting for the sky to clear before doing something brave." Her reply was barely a whisper. "Maybe you should." The kiss was gentle, inevitable, born from months of shared laughter and quiet rescue. And though the rain poured harder, neither of them moved to run for cover. For the first time, they both understood. Sometimes the storms you fear most are the ones that wash everything clean. Winter arrived early that year, coating Brightwood Academy in frost that glittered like crushed glass beneath the morning sun. The auditorium smelled of pine and chalk dust as families gathered for the winter recital. Lila Miles, now confident in her blue velvet dress, waited backstage with the patience of a hummingbird, clutching her note cards. "Daddy," she whispered, tugging Ethan's sleeve, "promise you'll clap the loudest?" "Always," he said, straightening her hair ribbon. "And don't forget to breathe." Beside them, Claire Hartman crouched to adjust the hem of Lila's dress, smiling in the way that made both their worlds feel brighter. When Lila stepped onto the stage, reading her piece about people who make hard choices, the audience fell silent. Her voice carried warmth beyond her years, about teachers who fight for fairness and fathers who never stop believing. Ethan's chest tightened. He knew exactly who those words were for. And when the recital ended, applause thundered through the hall, long and proud. Later, during the reception, Ethan found himself surrounded by parents and faculty, all congratulating him on Lila's piece. Claire stood across the room, speaking with the board chair. Her posture, poised, calm, reminded him of that night at the fountain. Only now, the strength came without armor. When she looked up, their eyes met through the crowd, and she smiled as if saying, "We made it." The chair tapped a microphone. "Before we close," he said, "I'd like to recognize Acting Director Hartman for the reforms that restored transparency to our scholarship program." Applause rose again, genuine this time. "And to the families who inspire us, Mr. Miles, would you join us?" Ethan froze, startled. Claire motioned gently. He stepped forward, feeling hundreds of eyes on him. "Brightwood owes its integrity to people like you," the chair continued, "whose stories remind us why fairness matters." Ethan nodded awkwardly, clearing his throat. "Honestly," he said into the microphone, "I just filled out the forms. You all did the rest." Laughter rippled softly through the hall. Then he turned toward Claire. "But I'd like to thank someone who reminded me that fairness isn't a system. It's people who decide to care." The room hushed. Claire's eyes shimmered, caught between pride and emotion. She stepped forward beside him, lowering the mic slightly.
And sometimes, she said, her voice warm but steady, the people we help teach us what real courage looks like. For a moment, the world fell away. The applause that followed felt distant, muffled by the pulse in their ears. In that shared silence, everything unsaid, gratitude, affection, faith, found its place. Later, outside under the string lights, Ethan handed Claire a small velvet box. "No speeches this time," he said, nervous but smiling. Inside lay a simple silver pendant shaped like an umbrella. "Why this?" she asked softly. "Because some people keep you dry without even meaning to," he said. She looked at him, eyes glistening. "It's beautiful." "So are you," he whispered. When she leaned in, the snow began to fall. Light, silent, endless. Around them, laughter and music drifted from the hall. But they stood still, beneath the soft glow of winter, knowing the storm that once broke them had now brought them home. A year later, the park bloomed again with cherry blossoms, soft petals drifting like snowflakes over the fountain where it had all begun. Ethan Miles sat on a weathered bench, coat unbuttoned, coffee warming his palms. Lila, now 8 and fearless, skipped through puddles in yellow rain boots, her laughter carrying through the morning air. Across the path, Claire Hartman was crouched beside a small boy who'd dropped his balloon, smiling as she tied the string back around his wrist. When she rose and crossed toward them, the light caught her hair, and Ethan thought, not for the first time, that sometimes fate doesn't shout, it whispers. "Remember this place?" Claire asked, settling beside him. "How could I forget?" he said. "This is where everything started." She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. "And where it keeps starting." They sat in silence for a while, watching Lila help another child pick fallen blossoms out of the fountain. It was such a small gesture, gentle, unremarkable, yet it felt like the universe winking back at them. "Do you ever think about that night?" Ethan asked quietly. "Every time it rains," Claire replied. "It reminds me that the hardest moments in life don't always come to break us. Sometimes they connect us." Ethan nodded, eyes fixed on Lila. "She still believes the world's full of good people." "That's because she's right," Claire said softly. "And because you proved it." A breeze rippled through the trees, scattering petals over their shoes. Claire laughed, brushing one from his shoulder. "Nature's confetti," she said. "Guess it approves," he replied with a grin. Moments later, Lila came running toward them, her raincoat flapping behind her like a cape. "Miss Claire, Daddy, look, I helped," she said proudly, pointing to the boy now holding his balloon again. Claire bent to hug her. "You have a gift, Lila." "I know," she said matter-of-factly. "I stop for people, just like Daddy did. That's how the world gets fixed." Ethan and Claire exchanged a glance, quiet, full, certain. There was nothing left to fix anymore. As rain began to fall, they didn't move. 3 silhouettes under one shared umbrella, laughter, warmth, and the echo of everything they'd endured. Proof that kindness, once given, always finds its way home.